we left off last week. We did most of chapter 22. But what I did is I kind of skipped the first 5 verses, and I want to kind of bring you back into context of where we are. In chapter 21, we talked about David is running from Saul. It's the beginning of his run, and one of his places is Nov. And we saw what happened. We talked about Nov. We took it in context further on, and then we skipped to what, beginning in verse 6 in chapter 22, we learn about how Saul finds out that David was in Nov, and we learn about Doeg, the Edomite, who reports to Saul, and then as a result, the whole city of Nov is destroyed. The first 5 verses of chapter 22, though, follows David. Okay, so I just wanted to keep these scenes together, where at the beginning, from chapter 21 and then the rest of 22, we were following more or less the scene at Nov and what happened at Nov. And now I want to go back to, well, where's David in all of this? And then we'll continue the story of David in chapter 23. So in chapter 22, we learned David departed from there. Okay, he was at the time at the Philistines. He's at Achish, the king of Gath. He left there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and all his father's house heard, they joined him down there. Okay, so he's in a cave. Now here I'm going to start the share screen. I hope I do this right. Okay, so do you see? Wait, one thing I need to. I want to do that. I want to see everybody again. How do I do that? Good. Okay. So so do you all see the map here? Okay, good. So this is a map we've used in the past, and I just want to give you a sense of where we are. So first of all, this area here, of course, is the tribe of Judah, and it actually goes all the way down. Okay. What is going on here? Okay, it goes all the way down. And just north of Judah is Benjamin. That is Saul's tribe, and it's also where his capital is. And we're going to see that that Saul is going to be in Gibeah. If you see here is Gibeon, and then down is Jerusalem. About midway between the two is Gibeah. So that's where Saul is sitting. That's where his capital is. To the west of Judah, we have this territory here that is Philistines, okay? And we have Gath. So we know now that we learned at the end of chapter 21 that David was briefly in Gath, which is ruled by Achish, okay? And he's in this area here. Now he's going to go from there. In other words, he has to run, okay? And he's going to Adullam, where Adullam is back in Judah, and it is roughly here, okay? It's at the northwest edge, more or less, just above this Yarmouth place is Adullam, okay? So that's where he is. So he's come from Gaza, he's come from Gath, just across, and that's where he is. He's in this cave in Adullam, but this is very significant. He's back in Judah. Judah is his tribe, okay? Now, just to the east of where he is Bethlehem, and we know that's where he's from, okay? So he's there. While he's in Adullam, his family joins him. So either he sends a message or whatever, and they come from Bethlehem to Adullam, and they join him in this cave, okay? Now, verse 2, everyone who was in straits and everyone who was in debt and everyone who was desperate joined him, okay? And he became their leader. There were about 400 men with him. So who are these 400 men? These 400 men, in many ways, they remind us of the people that Jephthah gathers around him, okay? These are, in the case of Jephthah is an outsider in the tribe of Manasseh. He's in Gilead on the other side. And if you recall, he's an outsider, and it is the elders of his tribe who ask him, please help us, defend us, whatever. And who joins him? Well, not the establishment, not the regular army of the tribe, because Jephthah's been an outsider. We have a very similar situation here. David is running from the king. He can't just, who's going to help him? Who's going to protect him? If he remains just one person, on the one hand, you might say it's easier for him to get around. On the other hand, he has absolutely no protection. So if he's going to defend himself from Saul and his army, okay, and we already know that he's going to be putting together an army to find him, then he has to have some people. Well, who wants to come with him? All these outsiders, these desperate people, if they were in desperate straits, if they were in debt, anyone who was desperate in any way, that's who joins him. So he puts together a band of 400 men, not including his family, and in many ways, it sounds like, I don't know, a gang, okay? A gang. He's going to somehow have to sustain himself and all these people on the one hand, and on the other hand, he needs these people to help defend him, and we'll see how that plays out, okay? Then David went from there to Mitzpeh of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, let my father and mother come and stay with you until I know what God will do for me. Okay, so he's in this cave for a while. We don't know really why he leaves the cave, because, I don't know, maybe he just feels it's not clear. We don't know how long he's in the cave, and we don't know why he leaves. He clearly feels desperate, okay? And he goes to Moab, and he goes to the king of Moab, and he says, let me at least put my parents here. His parents are elderly, I'm sure, at this point. And David probably realizes he's been running around with his little band of army. He's not going to be able to protect his parents. Now, what's the deal with his family, his parents, his brothers? Well, if the king is after David, then he's going to kill everybody in David's family. That's just how it goes, okay? So he knows he has to protect his family. I'm assuming his brothers remain with him, okay? Why not? They're of military age and certainly have experience, but his parents he establishes in Moab. Now, so he led them to the king of Moab, and they stayed with him as long as David remained in the stronghold. So basically, David is staying in Moab, and he leaves his parents there for protection. Okay. Now, it's very interesting, though. David is going to the king of Moab. Now, you may ask, the king? How does he get to the king? He's just this shepherd boy from Judah, from Bethlehem, who for a while was one of the king's men of arms. Now he's running from the king. How does he have this connection with the king of Moab? Okay, to understand that, you have to go to the book of Ruth. You go to the book of Ruth. Let's just remind ourselves of some of these verses. Ruth chapter 1, the very, very beginning of Ruth. We're going to start with the very beginning of Ruth. I just have to find it. Now, the Ruth in the Hebrew Bible is in a different place from the Ruth in your Bible. You have it right after Judges, and we have it in the back of the book. That is a whole different story, but why can't I find it? Well, I'll get through it. Of course, I should have put a bookmark in, but that would have been clever. Not so clever. I know, you know what it is? Ruth is like 4 chapters. And this particular Bible of mine, I'm going to do it easier. And I have the tabs. Okay, Ruth, here we go. Okay, and now I know exactly where it is. I'm sorry, I'm sounding so unorganized today. It would have been so much simpler if I had just marked it. But okay, here we go. Don't forget it. I can't find it in English. I'm just going to translate it myself. Okay, it happened in the days of the judges. There was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem of Judea went to live in the fields of Moab, him, his wife, and his 2 sons. Okay, and the name of the man was Elimelech. The name of his wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Machlon and Kilion. They were from Ephrat. Now we remember Ephrat is from Bethlehem of Judah, And they came to the fields of Moab, and they were there. Elimelech died, and the husband of Naomi, and she was left with her 2 sons. They each married Moabite women. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the second was Ruth. Okay, so we know that Ruth was a Moabite. At the very end of the book of Ruth, we learn of the genealogy of David. Okay, and we see at the very end in chapter 4, beginning in verse 18. It starts with Peretz. Peretz is actually the name of the son that is born, or one of the sons Peretz is one of the sons that's born to Judah. Okay, we're going back. And it goes down until we get to Boaz. Verse 21, Salmon gave birth to Boaz, and Boaz gave birth to Oved. So the name of the son, which we have just met 2 verses before, Ruth and Boaz's son, is Oved. Then Oved gave birth to Jesse, and Jesse gave birth to David. So basically, Ruth is David's great-grandmother, okay? Now, there's a Jewish tradition that says that Ruth was not just a Moabite woman, but she was royalty. She was a member of the royal family of Moab. And where do we get that from? From the verses we are just doing here in Samuel. Because David, an ordinary shepherd, can go to Moab and ask them to ask the king of Moab to look after his parents. He doesn't go to just some Moabite family, he goes to the king. Okay, this we can understand. It makes sense then that he is a descendant of royalty. His great-grandmother was not just a Moabite, she was a Moabite princess, and therefore she's a member of the royal family. So that's just a tradition that I wanted to share with you, and it makes sense then why he went to Moab. Okay, so, but then we have the prophet Gad. Now, until now, the only prophet we have met is Samuel. In the course of David's life, Samuel will still be, we saw David went to Samuel a few chapters ago to consult with him about the fact that Saul was chasing him. And Samuel will die soon, but we have 2 other prophets that will be connected with David. One is Gad and one is Nathan. And so here we meet Gad. We don't know him before, but he comes to David with the word of God saying, do not stay in the stronghold. Go at once to the territory of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Cheret. Okay, now where's Cheret? It is not clear. Some people say that later on, chapter 2 later, we see that David is going to be in a place called Choresh. And so there are commentaries that believe that Cheret and Choresh, which is just a question of switching one letter, are the same place. Where exactly is that? That is further, where is it? It's in the desert of Ziph, which is about here. Okay, so let's track him. He went from Gath to Adullam, which is here. He went to Adullam, down and across to Moab, and now he's going back to Judea, and he's going to be in a place called Choresh, which, if Cheret is the same as Choresh, later on we learn that Choresh is in Ziph, which is about just south of Hebron. It's actually here, southeast of Hebron. Okay, that's Ziph. And Ziph will become significant afterwards as well. Okay, and this is where he is. And then we will go from here, and in between, we learn that, don't forget, David has left Nov. He's gone to all different places, but then the rest of the chapter tells us about Saul going after Nov, finding out he was in Nov, and missing him, of course. Now we're going to start back with chapter 23, which takes us back to David. David was told, now where's David now? David is here, okay? He's about here. David was told the Philistines are raiding Keilah and plundering the threshing floors. Okay, where's Keilah? Keilah's back very close to Adullam. Okay, maybe Adullam's a little north of Yarmouth, and Keilah's just south. So he's going back to a part of Judah that's very close to the Philistines again. Okay, and so, but he hears that these Jews who are living here in Judea, in this area, are being persecuted by the Philistines. Again, so close, they're just coming over. And what are they doing? They're plundering the threshing floor. I have to tell you something very, very interesting. In Hebrew, it's shosim et hagranot, and Granot from the word goren is a threshing floor, okay? Shosim are people who are plunderers or robbers, okay? But it's very similar to a different word, okay? Lishasef et hagaron, to cut the throat, to the throat. And when I first read this, I said, oh my God, those people from Gaza are slicing people's throats. It was like such a echo of what we are seeing today. But that's not exactly what it means here. But just to share that with you, because for me it was very significant. Anyway, David consulted the Lord. Shall I go and attack these Philistines? In other words, he's just a guy. He has 400 people, not a real army, just a bunch of people who can help him fight. And he's been worried about protecting himself, but now he hears people from his tribe of Judah are in trouble, and he doesn't know what he should do. Should he go and help them? Which, of course, puts him in greater danger, not because he's going to be a danger vis-a-vis the Philistines, but also he can't go to a place like Keilah and take on the Philistines without, Saul finding out and then knowing where he is. But he asks God, and God says, yes, that's what you need to do. But then David's men said to him, look, we are afraid here in Judah. How much more if we go to Keilah against the forces of the Philistines? So David consulted the Lord again. And the Lord answered him, march down at once to Keilah, for I'm going to deliver the Philistines into your hands. Okay, now the first thing I want to mention here is how is he consulting God? The traditional way that we've learned about in both here in the book of Samuel, but particularly in the book of Judges, the traditional way to consult God at this point, okay, is to consult with the priest via the breastplate. And it is via the breastplate that these messages come back from God. And if we look at the end of chapter 22, we learn about the fact that after the priests of Nov are all slaughtered, one survives, and that is Eviatar. Okay? He flees to David, and it says, when Eviatar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord, David said to Eviatar, I knew that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would tell Saul, I am to blame for all the deaths in your father's house. That we remember. Stay with me. Do not be afraid, for whoever seeks your life must seek my life also. Okay? So it will be my care to guard you. So we know that amongst the 400 people, we now have a new addition, and that's Eviatar, who is a priest. So it is very logical that he is consulting God through Eviatar. And we're going to see later on that becomes very clear. Okay? What does God answer him? He says, no, go to Keilah. I am going to deliver the Philistines into your hands. David and his men went to Keilah, fought against the Philistines. He drove off their cattle and inflicted a severe defeat on them. Thus David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. Now here the translation said he drove off their cattle. Actually, what it says is that he drove the cattle, or he led the cattle. And many commentaries say he didn't drive them off, but he took them. Because again, he has 400 men. Not only they're helping him in his battles, but he has to feed them all. And so this becomes a very good solution. The Philistines have cattle. Before he actually goes and strikes them, he actually takes their cattle, and that's something that helps him feed his people. Okay. And then we have here, when Eviatar, son of Abimelech, fled to David at Keilah, he brought down an ephod with him. Here we go. You see? So we know that. Now we jump to Saul. Saul was told that David had come to Keilah, and Saul thought, God has delivered him into my hands, for he has shut himself in by entering a town with gates and bars. So Saul hears about the battle, but he is assuming that what has happened is that Saul has entered Keilah, and they've set up some kind of a garrison or something to prevent the Philistines from coming in. And therefore he assumes that what's happening is that he'll go and he'll lay siege to Keilah from the outside, and he will force David out. Okay? When David learned that Saul was planning to harm him, Saul summoned all the troops for war to go down to Keilah and besiege David and his men. When David learned that Saul was planning to harm him, he told the priest Abiathar to bring the ephod forward. And here we say specifically that the way David consults the Lord is through the ephod. And David said, "O Lord God of Israel, your servant has heard that Saul intends to come to Keilah and destroy the town because of me." Now he is already, this is right after Nov, that Nov was destroyed because of him, and so he is not an innocent anymore. He knows that Saul will stop at nothing, including destroying the inhabitants of an entire city just because David is there. So he asked God two questions. One, will the citizens of Keilah deliver me into his hands? Will they betray me? And the second question is, will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, tell your servant. And the Lord said he will. He only answered that second question. Will Saul come down? God says yes. So then David persists. David continued, will the citizens of Keilah deliver me and my men into Saul's hands? And the Lord answered, they will. Imagine, David has just come. He has rescued Keilah. And now he's being told by the Lord he can't trust Keilah. He's got to leave. Now we already see he's been betrayed by Doeg. Already in Nov. He has hidden out in the cave in Adullam. He has escaped to Moab, come back to Judah because the prophet of God, prophet of God, whose name is God, told him he has to leave. Okay, go back to Judah. He's back in Judah, rescues his people, and then learns from God that he can't trust them. They will betray him as well. So you can imagine how desperate he is during this time. So David and his men, about 600 in number. Oh, we went from 400 to 600. Where did the extra 200 come from? Well, maybe some of the people of Keilah did want to join him. Maybe they, trusted him, etc. So they came with him, and the others stayed back. These are the ones he couldn't trust. Left Keilah at once and moved about wherever they could. And when Saul was told that David had got away from Keilah, he did not set out. Okay, so he already realized he missed him. Where does David go back now? He goes back to the desert, to the wilderness of Judah. He was staying in the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph. Okay, and it is here in verse 15, David was once at Choresh in the wilderness of Ziph when David learned that Saul had come out to seek his life. It is here, the Choresh, that it is in the wilderness of Ziph, that is the source for where commentaries believe the word Cheret is as well. So where is he? He is now in Ziph, and Ziph is here. Okay, so basically he was up here in Adullam. He went to Moab. He went back to Keilah. Now he's back here. So now he's further away from the Philistines. He's closer to Moab. He's in the center of Judea. Okay, David. And so David was once at Choresh in the wilderness of Ziph when David learned that Saul had come out to seek his life. And Saul's son Jonathan, okay, I don't like this. Okay, this English make it sound that he was here once before. The Hebrew, it just says that David, when he gets there to Ziph, he realizes that Saul's coming for him again. Okay, and Saul's son Jonathan came to David at Choresh and encouraged him in the name of God. He said to him, "Do not be afraid. The hand of my father Saul will never touch you. You are going to be king over in Israel, and I shall be second to you, and even my father Saul knows this is so." And the two of them entered into a pact before the Lord. David remained in Choresh, and Jonathan went home. Okay, so we have again one more meeting. We thought that last meeting was going to be a final meeting. They parted before with a covenant, a second covenant, okay, that we saw a few chapters ago, and now Jonathan comes back, okay? And Jonathan comes back, but here we have a covenant that has an addition to it. It's not a covenant that we protect each other, that we already had before. But this is a covenant that first of all, Jonathan recognizes that indeed David will be king. He says his father also knows it. He doesn't want to admit it. He doesn't want to accept it, which is why he's trying to kill David. Okay. But Jonathan accepts it. So what is the covenant? I recognize you will be king. You put me as your second in command. And so that was the plan. Okay. That was the plan. It kind of a product of what we saw until now, where there was a pledge to look after each other's family. But this takes it even further. And now we have the next betrayal. Some Ziphites, people from Ziph, went up to Saul in Gibeah and said, David is hiding among us in the strongholds of Chorosh at the hill of Hachilah, south of Jeshimon. So if your majesty has the desire to come down, and it will be our task to deliver him into your majesty's hands. My goodness. They could have minded their own business, and they go out of their way, these people of Ziph, to betray David. Okay, so he's being betrayed at every corner. And Saul replied, may you be blessed of the Lord for the compassion you have shown me. Go now and prepare further. Look around and learn what places he sets foot on and who has seen him there, for I've been told he's a very cunning fellow. So basically, Saul now turns the people of Ziph into his own spies. Go and figure out exactly where he is. Look around and learn in which of all of his hiding places he has been hiding, and return to me when you are certain. I will then go with you, and if he is in the region, I will search him out among all the clans of Judah. Now, what does that mean, all the clans of Judah? Or all the, actually, you can also translate it as all the leaders, the chieftains of Judah, okay? That focus on of Judah. David himself is of Judah. He is being betrayed by his own relatives, by his own tribes people, okay, by the people of Judah, which creates a sense of betrayal even more than it just, the Bible is helping us hone in into where the real betrayal is. They left at once for Ziph ahead of Saul. David and his men were then in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah to the south of Yeshimon. Okay, so they moved from Ziph. They moved from Ziph, which is here, okay, and they go just a little bit south of there, south of Eshtamoa. They're going to Maon. Now, today, there is a community, a modern Jewish community called Maon, okay, and it's right more or less in the same place right here. So he has already moved. In other words, we thought he's in Ziph and he's there, but he must have already sensed, David, that he wasn't safe in Ziph, and he had by then moved further south, okay? When Saul and his men came to search, David was told about it, and he went, right? And he went down to the rocky region and stayed in the wilderness of Maon, okay? So this is explaining why he go to Maon. He heard about this. He suspected. On hearing this, Saul pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul was making his way along one side of a hill, and David and his men were on the other side of the hill. They're in the same place, and this huge boulder or hill is basically between them. David was trying hard to elude Saul, and Saul and his men were trying to encircle David and his men and capture them. You can just imagine the suspense here, okay? He's closing in on David. When a messenger came and told Saul, come quickly, for the Philistines have invaded the land. The word in Hebrew for messenger is malach. Malach can mean messenger, and it can mean an angel. And there's no question the messenger comes to Saul. He's assuming it's a messenger from his court, letting him know he's got a bigger problem than David. Again, look across here to the west. We have Philistia all over here, okay? And he's been chasing. He came from here down through Judea, chasing here, here, and here. And now he's being told, you've got bigger problems. You better go over to Philistines, because they are in the process of moving across and attacking all these areas of Judah. Saul gave up his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. That is why that place came to be called the Rock of Separation. Now, this is a very interesting thing. In Hebrew, the word is Sela Amachlekot, which basically means rock of separation. In modern Hebrew, this has been turned into it's actually not just in modern Hebrew. It goes back, many, many centuries, into a expression that is Sela HaMachloket. It's not machlekot, divisions, but machloket, which means argument. It becomes it means literally the rock of the argument, okay? Today it's used when you want to say, what is your point of contention? Okay, you use this word in Hebrew, Sela Machloket. But what is it trying to say? It's talking about, and this is again a midrash that it may be true, may not be true, but reading it this way as not just the place of separation, but a place of contention, of a place of disagreement, that within the soldiers of Saul there was a division, this difference of opinion. between those who felt they wanted to go fight the Philistines and those who felt they didn't want to fight the Philistines. They wanted to stay and pursue David, which means, okay, that they felt that the fight against David so consumed them, not just Saul, but so consumed part of the army that they thought that was more important than going to fight against an enemy of Israel. And of course, we know that Saul didn't agree with that. But I think this is a very interesting insight that we have, that there were people within Saul's camp that they had, and it makes sense because look how many people are betraying David to Saul. It's not just that they're afraid of Saul. They're going out of their way to make trouble to David. And so you have these divisions also in the camp of Saul and also within David's own tribe. People are looking for ways to betray him, to harm him, etc. We're going to stop here. Next week, I'm going to start with two chapters in Psalms that David is writing about the experiences we just read about now. So we're going to start with that to kind of give a bit of an overview of that, and then we'll move on to chapter 24. Anybody have any questions? I'm just going to stop the share so we can see each other. Yes, anyone have questions or comments?
I have a comment. It would seem that Saul achieved what he wanted by destroying Nod, because I think he put fear in the community. So even the people in Judah were afraid to help David because they were afraid they would be destroyed like Nod was destroyed.
Right, except I think David also learned his lesson, and so he did not seek help from anybody. You'll notice he went to Moab to seek help. Every place else, he's hiding in a cave, he's hiding in a forest. He's not asking anyone.
We don't want anybody to be destroyed.
Right. But what happens is he goes to Keilah and he rescues them.
Mm-hmm.
So here they owe their lives to David. You would think that they wouldn't be betraying him because, I don't know, he was there, he left, and he saved them. I don't know. You're right. Maybe they're afraid that Saul would kill them. It could be. But I don't know. I feel that in all of these cases, they go out of their way to report to Saul. They didn't have to report to him. They can let it happen. If he finds out, he finds out. We're ignorant. We don't know. I don't know. But it's very possible that does explain why the people of Keilah. I don't think it explains why the people from Ziph, because there's no connection between them. He's in a forest in the area of Ziph, but there's no indication that he's talking to anybody in Ziph. So it's very easy for the people of Ziph to say, we didn't see him. We never spoke to him. We don't know.
Saul to be the king. Maybe they still were in support of Saul.
Yeah, I think they are. I think there's definitely what's going on here is a desire to betray David.
Mm-hmm.
But even David said that he didn't want to lift his hand against the Lord's anointed. Other people would have seen Saul as the Lord's anointed, and one wonders, well, how many did know that David was going to be the next king? I mean, was that common knowledge?
No, it was not common knowledge at all. And that's why all of this, I mean, if you remember the story of Nov, and by the way, this not raising a hand against the anointed is what we're going to do in next week's chapter 24. Okay. But if you recall in Nov, when he shows up there, the priest has no idea that he's no longer a trusted servant of Saul. So nobody knows. Nobody knows that. It was only afterwards that Saul made it clear that he's going up against him. And he announces, he doesn't say David's been anointed. He announces that David is rebelling against the king. And then he has these 400 people. So he's treating them as an army that is rebelling against the king. When in fact, David is just running for his life and trying to protect himself from being killed.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. I was just sort of thinking that, the rest of the people in the land wouldn't have seen themselves necessarily as taking sides, but more as standing up for the Lord's anointed. And
they wouldn't have known that he was anointed. He did not make that known.
But Saul is the Lord's anointed.
Saul is anointed. That's right. That's right.
So that's a logical thing.
Right. So what's happening is because Saul is creating an impression which is false, that David is seeking to depose the king,
Yeah.
that is why, and of course Saul is the king and he is the anointed king. That is why they are standing with him. But on the other hand, David was a favorite of Saul, and it's just like, I don't know. He's somebody that you would wonder. I don't know. You're right. I mean, it's natural that they might say, okay, I got to get in good with the king. I need to do what the king wants. Maybe they even believe the king. It's very possible. But
But as you said the other week, if only Saul had not been jealous and had let his daughter marry him and have grandchildren, problems.
Right, exactly.
But it wasn't like that, was it?
Absolutely. I mean, Saul creates now, and we're going to see it later. Saul is already creating the foundation for civil war. Because after Saul is dead, there's going to be a civil war before David ends up being king of the whole nation. Okay? Because even after Saul is dead, he has loyalists.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So, this is going to, and all of this was created by Saul. None of it had to happen.
Sondra,
yes.
One thing about Saul at this point is that how much he is so involved with what is affecting him, and his eyes is off of taking care of his people.
Although we have to say to his credit that when he hears that the Philistines are attacking, he does leave the chase for David and goes there. So he still does realize that's his priority.
He was off of his people and taking care of his people. He was all engaged with David and going after David rather than taking care of his people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there's so much of what we are seeing today in Israel that is so, I don't know, it so reminds me of some of these things. And if we look at Hamas today, and I don't think that Saul was evil like Hamas by any means, so don't, I'm not making that kind of comparison. But what you can see is when somebody becomes obsessed with something, and in the case of Hamas, they're absolutely obsessed with killing Jews to the extent that they don't care about their people. Now, of course, they take this to the extreme. Not only do they care about their people, but they actively put their people in danger. And they don't care, and because they're such sinister people. But if you take it just on a different level, what happens when you become obsessed with hatred, okay, and how it just skews your whole perspective, your priorities, to the point that it can damage you. Like you mentioned, Allison, and you reminded us that had Saul just let it be, his daughter was married to David, and their children would have been the kings, and that was his grandchildren. So, and his Jonathan would have been David's second in command. So it would have been a merger of two houses. It wasn't that David had to replace Saul. He wasn't seeking that at all, but Saul was so obsessed that he couldn't let it go.
Sondra, can I ask
yes.
April, can I ask a language question?
Sure.
I understand there's no P in the Arabic.
P? What does that mean? The word
letter
P?
P.
Oh, P, that's correct. Yes.
And the word Philistia from your map, is that derived from the Greek? Is that like of the Philistines?
Well, the word in Hebrew is with a P. Plishtim. Now, the P sound and the F sound in Hebrew are the same letter with and without a dot.
Right.
Okay. So a P with a dot is P, and a P without a dot is F. Okay.
But the Arabs would never name themselves after something that doesn't even have a pronunciation in their language.
Okay. Well, right. Well, so the Palestinian, the fact that they call themselves Palestinians today, that's all a crock. Okay.
Right.
The name Palestine was given to the area by the Romans in the 2nd century. Okay. And what they were doing is Palestine was named after the Philistines. But again, the P and the F in Hebrew is the same. So in Hebrew it was Plishtim. And the Greeks turned Plishtim into Philistine. Okay. Right.
So
Okay,
it is
and
from
it's
Greek.
possible that that had something to do with the fact that the Arabs couldn't, but there weren't Arabs in this part of the world at that time. Okay, they came much later. So I'm not sure how that, I don't know enough about the Greek language to know how Palestine became Philistine, but that's what it was. The whole Palestinian thing, they're taking it from, they actually, when they call themselves, they don't say Palestine, they say Palestina. Okay.
Oh, all right.
So they don't use the P. That has been the English of it. So,
I think they come from the Minoan civilizations, so from over from Crete, and I think there's some
yes,
similarity
the Philistines, yes,
with the
are
words
part,
there with the in Crete
yeah,
with the
they're
S.
called the nations of the sea. And they are coming primarily from the Greek islands. They were mercenaries, and they're connected to, if you go back again to the book of Judges, you see their Sisera. Okay. Sisera was one of them, and they were mercenaries, and it was Yavin, the king of Canaan, who basically hired them to help him fight his battle. But these were similar nations that invaded. In fact, the word Plishtim means invaders.
Yeah.
And they invaded from the sea, from the west. And so they remained along the west coast. They never penetrated fully during this time, although they definitely persecuted the people throughout the book of Judges and into this part of the book of Samuel. The Philistines go further east and come back again, or further east and come back again. But the place where they're quite set is the 5 cities.
If you go to the southern coast in Crete, I think it's a place called Akrotiri. There's archaeological sites where there's maps where it actually tracks the movement of peoples from the Minoan civilization off across the Med and round and in through the Philistine area.
Right,
so you can look at the historical point from that side coming through.
Right, and they've done also compare pottery. From some Philistine sites in Israel, like in Ashkelon and that area, to the pottery that you would find in those Greek areas. Yes.
Can I go back, Lynn? Can I go back to Alice's point, which she was saying? It's interesting that she was making the point that maybe people were being loyal to Saul because he was the king. But as you were going through the map, we're talking about David being up. And then, so to go, it wouldn't have just popped across the Dead Sea. We've had quite a lot of travelling to go round to get to Moab and a lot of travelling to get back. So this couldn't have all happened within a couple of days. So as he was travelling about, news could have got on that people could have been started to say that David was betraying that. So I wondered, have you any idea how long a period of time this all covers?
No, I really don't. But I mean, it wasn't years, that's for sure. It's months, if anything. But I actually was wondering how they got across. Let me show this map again. How they got across the Dead Sea. Because if you can see, wait, where am I here? Okay. No, why am I doing that? Wait, where am I? Here we go. Good. Okay. As you can see right here, right here, there's a little inlet in the Dead Sea. Okay. So I was wondering if this wasn't a place where you could cross more easily. Like maybe there was a ferry or some kind of a thing that could cross the Dead Sea at this point because it was very narrow. Because I would find it hard to believe that he would go down. He was not going to be welcome in Edom. Okay. To go up here, okay, it was taking him dangerously close to Benjamin. He wouldn't have done that to get down to Moab. I think he had to have crossed the Dead Sea. I don't see any other way to do it. But
is it possible that, I mean, nowadays, obviously the level's varying and it's quite salty. But I know that when I've been to Masada or En-Gedi, they've always said that in the days of David, the Dead Sea would have actually come much closer, whereas like now, I mean, I remember the first time I visited the Dead Sea, it was far, far wider than it is today.
Yes.
So in those days, I mean, they're saying at the time of Masada that the Dead Sea was really up close to it. So perhaps it wasn't quite so salty.
So that's what I was wondering the same thing, because this is a map I got off the internet, And it is a map of Israel from the time of the book of Joshua, and this time. And it has that little hook in the Dead Sea, and it shows it very narrow. So I don't know if they're taking the Dead Sea as we know today and superimposing it on this map, or this is what they thought the map would have looked like in those years. I really don't know. I don't know if we have any way of knowing. Now, we do know that the Jordan would have been wider at that time than it is today, for sure. And we do know that there were passages across the Jordan. I don't know what those passages looked like. Were they bridges? Were they ferries? It's not clear. But we know, for example, in the story, in the beginning of Joshua, in chapter 2 in Joshua, when the spies come across to Rahab to Jericho and then they go back, it talks about crossing over at the crossings of the Jordan. And that we have a similar type of words in Jephthah when he's crossing back and forth from east to west, because he's in this area. He's in the area of Manasseh, and he's going back and forth. So they did go back and forth. I don't know how, though, but it's very possible that it was a ferry or something. Ferry could have been like a raft. Make a primitive raft. You can sail across the Dead Sea. It's not a big deal. I don't know, but that's what I assume, but I don't really know.
Go back to the point about the Philistines and the Palestinians. I mean, I've always understood from my understanding of history that the Philistines and the Palestinians are absolutely nothing to do with each other.
Oh, they're nothing to do with each other.
It was only
absolutely. No. The Philistines were long gone. I mean, the Philistines were basically defeated by David and then kind of petered out. Okay. But no, but I'll tell you how it started. The Romans under Hadrian was a very evil emperor in the 2nd century. And in the year 132, the Israelites, they weren't Israelites then, the Judeans or whatever, that were in the land. And we're talking about after the destruction of the temple. This is 60 odd years after the destruction of the temple. The Romans are well ensconced as the leaders in Israel, but there's still Jews living there. Okay. And the Hadrian starts these draconian measures, decrees, trying to prevent the Jews from being Jewish and all that. And there's a rebellion. And the rebellion lasts 3 years, during which time, in certain areas of the country, under Bar Kokhba, the Jews there managed to sustain a level of autonomy and push off the Romans. The Romans, they're fighting this whole time, but it's kind of amazing that for 3 whole years, they sustain an autonomy against the great Roman Empire. But finally, in 135, the Romans defeat them. Okay, and that's really the end of any hopes of autonomy, Jewish independence, autonomy in the land of Israel until the modern Zionist movement. Okay, at the point at which they defeat these Jews, the Romans then create a number of measures to kind of erase a Jewish connection to the land of Israel. So first of all, there's a mass exile at that point. Most of the Jews who were exiled from the land of Israel were not exiled when Jerusalem was destroyed, but exiled after this, in the 2nd century, after this the revolt was put down. But in addition, the Romans changed the names of key cities as if to erase the Jewish connection between the connection between the Jews and the land of Israel. So they changed the name of Jerusalem to Ilia Capitolina. They changed the name of Shechem, to Neapolis, which means new city. And from Neapolis, because one of you said, I think Allison reminded us that the Arabs cannot say P, they say B. And that's how we got the name Nablus. It went from Neapolis to Nablus after the Muslim conquest. And so and then they changed the name Judea. How can you say Judea doesn't belong to the Jews, right? So they changed the name and they called it Philistia, or not Philistia, Palestina. And they said, let's pretend the Jews never existed. This really was Philistine land, okay? And so, and they weren't threatened by the Philistines. They could say, we are true to history of the land. It was Philistine land, but there was no Philistines there to threaten them. They were long extinct, okay? So that's why they called it Palestina. The irony, of course, is not just, first of all, when the British took over They called the area Palestine, harking back to that original name. They could have called it Judea, they could have called it Israel, but they decided to call it Palestine. Okay, now, of course, the irony is that the Arabs are copying the same Roman methods. They are taking on the name Palestine instead of Israel to pretend there is no Jewish connection with Israel. We call the area Judea and Samaria. They call it occupied Palestine or occupied West Bank, because if they called it Judea, they would be recognizing that Jews have a connection. How can you say Judea doesn't belong to the Jews? So with the same battle of the names that we were part of against the Romans in the 2nd century, are the same battle that we're dealing with the Palestinians today. But guess what? We're going to win.
Yep.
So
And Tiberius was another name. Tiberius, that is today Tiberius, is another name change. What was it changed from? Do you know?
That I don't know. No, Tiberius is not modern. Tiberius is mentioned in the Talmud. It goes back to at least the 1st century that was a name that was given. And it's in Hebrew. Well, Tiberius is Greek, but in Hebrew it's Tiberia. And that was the name. So it's not a biblical city, but it is a very ancient Jewish city going back to the time of the Second Temple.
So before the Second Temple destruction and it became Tiberius,
well,
before
it was Tiberia.
What was it called?
Pardon?
What was it called before Tiberius?
Well, the city, I don't know if there's no record of a biblical city there, but there was a city called Tiberia. That's what we know. That city was around during the time of the Second Temple. Okay, like 1st century, it was there. And then the Greeks, they just renamed all the cities just as a translation. Although, wait, Tiberius, no, you're right. Tiberius is a Roman name named after a Roman emperor.
Right.
Yes. I'm wrong. You're absolutely right. You're right.
So it had to have an ancient name.
But it may not have been. I know that in the Talmud and in the Mishnah, it is referred to as Tiberius.
Yeah.
So but the Romans were in the land of Israel for about half of the Second Temple period.
Yeah.
So even though they didn't, get rid of us, they were very influential here. And so it was very possible that the city was named to honor this, emperor or whatever, even though it was a Jewish.
Did Herod Antipas build it? Or was it?
Oh, my husband just came in and looked it up. He said Herod established the city.
Yeah.
Roman built city.
Okay. But again, that is somebody who was a Jewish king. He wasn't really Jewish, but he was like a king of Israel, but he was totally under the thumb of the Romans. Totally under the thumb of the Romans.
Yeah. I always understood that it wasn't called, that the Romans actually called it Syria Palestinia, not Palestine. So, but it's when the British came in that they called it Palestine, but not. So it was totally different name. So, and I understood as well that the Arabs refused to be called Palestinians, but your Jewish people accepted the name Palestine. So it's ironic that they're calling themselves Palestinians when they
what happened? Right. So Syria Palestina was the original name. I don't know if that's what the Romans gave it or the name that became known more in the Middle Ages, because there's a lot of different names. But yes, it definitely was Syria. But there was also a part that was called Judea, that was the southern part, and Syria Palestina was more the northern part of whatever. But 100%, what happened was, when the British called it Palestine, and I have actually an old stamp from the days of the British Mandate, and it says in the English Palestine, and in Hebrew it says Land of Israel. And so I don't know. There's Arabic there too, but I don't know what the Arabic says. But probably Palestina. So anyway, it was when you have Palestine is what the British called it as a modern English name taken from these names. Okay. But you're right. What happened was the Jews called themselves Palestinians.
And the Arabs refused.
And the Arabs didn't. Arabs called themselves, we're Arabs, right? And that's what's so ironic, because my mother always says she remembers in the 40s, she was a kid and she was in Zionist youth groups in the United States. And all of her counselors then moved to Israel before and during and after independence. Okay, they were moving to Israel from 46 to 50, 52. These were her counselors. And so they would talk about, we're going to Palestine. And then every so often somebody would come from Israel, and this is the pre-state days, okay, to their youth group. And everybody would say, well, the Palestinians have come to visit us, okay? And so when my mother always hears people talking about Palestinians, she said, Palestinians are Jews. They are Jews, you know, and she would talk about it for days in the old Zionist thing. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I see some comments that let me just see what they are.
Can I share something else with you that is totally not what we've been talking about? You know how Israel today, the IDF, warns people, leaflets, Gaza, etc., before they're going to bomb. Do you remember when the King David Hotel was blown up?
Yes.
Did you know that the King David Hotel was warned of the attack?
Yes.
Because there's a gentleman called Lance Lambert, and he's Jewish, and he knew two ladies who were actually in the King David Hotel at the time, and they were having afternoon tea, and the British soldiers came along and asked them would they mind having afternoon tea upstairs, and they didn't do anything about evacuating the King David Hotel.
So a fascinating book that I recommend to everybody is The Revolt by Menachem Begin, and he was the leader of the Irgun, and it was his organization that organized and carried out the bombing of the King David Hotel, and he goes through it in detail there. First of all, it's a fabulous book. I highly recommend it. Menachem Begin was Prime Minister of Israel beginning in 1977 until 1983, and he was the first Prime Minister of the right-wing Likud party. And it's just a fascinating story, but he does tell that in detail. I see here that Paul wrote that Rakat was the original name in Book of Joshua, and that was Tiberius. But he says the Jews still refer to by his original name in Talmudic times. But I do know the Talmud quotes the hot springs of Tiberius, Chamet Tveria. So it may be they also refer to as Rakat, but I know they definitely refer to it as Tiberius because that name is clearly mentioned in the Talmud.
And the Mishnah Torah was written there also by Rambam.
Rambam wrote it in Egypt. The Tiberius was a place later on. It was the Shulchan Aruch, the Rabbi Yosef Karo, okay, and he was one of there was a whole group, the city of Tiberias, as well as the city of Tzfat and Jerusalem and Hebron, those four cities were actually revived, but particularly Tiberias and Tzfat in the Galilee, after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain. They were expelled in 1492. A few years later, the Ottoman Empire, coming from Turkey, takes over this whole area. And so for the first time, Jews who had fled from Spain to Turkey could now come into Israel. They were part of the same empire. And so this was in the 16th century, there was a renaissance. And these cities then really came to the fore again. And that's where you have Rabbi Yosef Karo writing the Shulchan Aruch in Tiberias, in that area. Yeah. And that's, again, 16th century. Okay. Boy,
thank you for all
we had a lot of talk today. Went way over our time. Enjoyed it. And we will see you next week. Next week, we will have a regular class. I will just say now, and I will remind you again next week. In 2 weeks, it is Hanukkah. And so I will be canceling the class in 2 weeks. Actually, on 2 weeks on Wednesday night, I'm going to be having all my children and grandchildren over for a party.
Wait, we want to come too.
You can come. You can come. But it's going to be a very noisy party.
I wish we could. We'll be back, though, as soon as possible.
Yes, I know. Okay, anyway, great to see you. Be well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.